Her scream hit before the engine even died. "Get out!" she shrieked, her voice slicing through the quiet lakeside air like shattered glass. I froze, one hand still gripping the steering wheel of the moving truck, thinking maybe I'd misheard. But then she came storming down the sidewalk, heels cracking against the pavement, clutching a leather folder like it was a weapon. That was my first introduction to Laura Scott, the self-proclaimed queen of Oak Ridge. And from the way she moved, chin high, lips pursed, eyes locked on me like a target, it was clear she ruled this street through fear. I'd dreamed of this moment for years. After 2 decades of grinding in IT, I was finally ready to put down roots. My grandmother's cedar cottage sat on the quiet edge of Lake Maplewood, 6 inches, just 6 inches, outside the HOA boundary. I thought that meant freedom. I thought that meant peace. But when I stepped out of that truck, the wind carried something heavier than lake air. It carried the tension of a neighborhood ruled by one woman's obsession with control. She didn't bother introducing herself. She just marched straight up, folder raised like a badge of authority. "I'm Laura Scott, president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association," she announced, her voice trembling with righteous fury. "You can't just move here without registering. This property is under our jurisdiction." I tried to keep it polite. "Ma'am, I think there's a mistake," I said, resting the first box on the driveway. "This house was my grandmother's. She owned it outright. No HOA." Her laugh was sharp, almost unhinged. "Oh, there's no mistake." She shoved the folder into my chest. "Annual dues are $270,000, payable immediately." For a moment, I thought she was joking. I even chuckled, expecting her to smile, but her eyes stayed cold. "We don't tolerate rule breakers, nonconformists, or undesirables." The way she lingered on that last word made my stomach twist. It wasn't about money. It was about power. Behind me, Tracy stood on the porch, her hand resting on her belly. 8 months pregnant. Exhausted from the move, she looked pale but proud. I opened my mouth to de-escalate, to remind this woman that decency still existed. But then I heard Tracy gasp. When I turned, she was gripping the railing, face drained of color. Her body tensed, and she whispered one word that ripped through me. "Jake!" Her knees buckled. I dropped the box and sprinted toward her just as she collapsed into my arms. Her breath was shallow, her skin clammy, my world blurred. Panic, fear, the sound of Laura's heels clicking closer. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Laura snapped, rolling her eyes. "She's faking it. People like this always make a scene." That line burned itself into my memory. I didn't think, I just acted. I scooped Tracy up, her head resting against my shoulder, and ran for the car. Boxes crashed behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sped down Maplewood Drive, sirens blaring somewhere in the distance. As the flashing lights disappeared behind the trees, I thought the nightmare was over. I thought this was just one terrible encounter with a woman drunk on power. I was wrong. The nightmare hadn't ended. It had just found my address. The lake was glassy that morning, calm, still, lying. The sun climbed lazily over the water, painting the surface in gold, pretending nothing had happened. But inside the house, silence didn't mean peace. It meant waiting. Tracy lay upstairs on strict bed rest, doctor's orders. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. Every time she stirred, I stopped breathing. I'd promised her I'd handle everything. No stress, no noise, no Laura. I swore that woman's name wouldn't even reach our front porch again. But the neighborhood wasn't built for silence. Around mid-morning, a knock rattled the door. Firm, friendly, familiar. It was Mike Clark, the neighbor across the street. Mid-40s, salt and pepper beard, easy grin, the kind of guy who mowed his lawn in perfect stripes. He held up his phone before saying a word. "You should see this," he muttered. On the screen, Laura's voice filled my living room. "She's faking it," she screeched as the paramedics lifted Tracy into the ambulance. Her pearls glinted under the porch light, her face twisted in disgust. The videos zoomed in just as I yelled for help, and you could see neighbors frozen on their lawns, too scared to move. Mike lowered the phone, jaw tight. "She's done this before," he said quietly. "Maybe not to you, but to others. People stay quiet because she knows every loophole, every cop in this county. She's like a storm that never leaves." I clenched my fists. Well, this time, she picked the wrong house. He gave a humorless laugh. "That's what everyone says, before they give up." His words followed me long after he left. That evening, as I checked on Tracy, she managed a faint smile. "You can't let her live rent-free in your head, Jake," she said softly. "Promise me you'll focus on us." I promised, but I knew promises didn't stop storms. The next morning I was hauling a few boxes out of the truck when I saw her again. Laura Scott striding down the street like she owned it, pearls shining, posture stiff. This time she wasn't alone. Behind her lumbered a younger man, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes fixed on the ground. "Her nephew," she said proudly, "Derek." "Good morning, Mr. Rogers," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I noticed your trash cans aren't HOA approved. And your truck, very unsightly. We'll be issuing a fine." I exhaled slowly. "Laura, I told you, this house isn't part of your HOA." Her smile sharpened. "Denial won't save you, dear. The law is on my side." But Derek? He didn't look at me. He didn't look at her. His eyes darted to the ground, jaw clenched tight, like a man being dragged into someone else's mess. She eventually turned away, heels clacking like gunfire down the street. Derek followed in silence. That night, long after the lights in her windows went dark, I heard a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find Derek standing there alone, face pale in the moonlight. He leaned close, voice trembling. "I'm sorry about earlier," he whispered. "But you need to know something. She doesn't lose gracefully." When her own family told me to watch my back, I realized peace wasn't an option. Survival was. By sunrise, the whole town already knew my name, and half of them thought I forged it. I hadn't even had my first cup of coffee before realizing something had shifted. The air felt heavier that morning, like the calm before a storm that everyone knew was coming. When I walked down to the local cafe for breakfast, conversation stopped mid-sentence. People stared at me over their cups, whispering just loud enough for me to hear my own name tangled in their gossip. At first I tried to ignore it. Small-town curiosity, I told myself. But the tone wasn't curiosity. It was fear disguised as politeness. A woman in line glanced at me, then leaned toward her friend and muttered, "That's him. The one fighting Laura." Another man shook his head and whispered, "Should have paid the dues. You don't mess with Oak Ridge." It didn't take long to understand what was happening. Word had spread overnight about Laura's emergency HOA meeting. She'd called it a community defense session, claiming there was a dangerous outsider trying to undermine neighborhood order. By the time my coffee hit the counter, people were already talking about me like I was the villain of the story. When I got home, Tracy was sitting by the window, hands resting gently on her stomach. She'd heard the rumors too. "They're saying you forged the deed," she said quietly, her voice brittle. "That our house sits on HOA land. That we cheated the system." I sank into the chair across from her, heart pounding. "It's lies, Tracy. All of it." She nodded. "I know, but she's not trying to prove you wrong. She's trying to make you lose your temper. That's her game." I rubbed my temples. "And what do I do? Just sit here while she rewrites the truth?" Tracy met my eyes with a steadiness that still amazes me. "You stay calm. She feeds on fear. Don't give it to her." That advice saved me more times than I can count. But that morning, it felt impossible to follow. Every phone vibration made me wonder who was talking now, which rumor had spread next. By afternoon, Mike dropped by, looking grim. "It's worse than I thought," he said, pulling out his phone again. The video of Laura yelling during the ambulance scene was everywhere. Facebook groups, neighborhood forums, even the town's online bulletin. "She's calling it edited," Mike said. "Claims you staged it to make her look bad." I laughed bitterly. So now I'm an actor? He didn't smile. She's holding that meeting tonight. You're the headline. As evening crept in, I heard another knock. Softer this time. Derek. His eyes darted around before he spoke. She's out of control, he whispered. She told me to stand by her tomorrow, or lose everything she's helped me with. She said if I don't back her up, she'll ruin me too. I stared at him, seeing the truth flicker behind his fear. Laura's empire wasn't built on loyalty, it was built on blackmail. He looked up, desperate. You don't understand, Jake. People are scared of her. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Maybe it's time they stop being scared. By dusk, I stood on my porch, watching the lights flicker on across the neighborhood. Curtains twitched, whispers carried through the trees. Oak Ridge didn't feel like a community anymore. It felt like a tinderbox. And Laura Scott was standing there, match in hand, ready to set it all on fire. She stood at the podium like a judge, pearls flashing under fluorescent lights, binder raised high, ready to sentence me for the crime of living on my own land. The community hall buzzed with tension, folding chairs squeaking, whispers slicing through the air like static. Laura Scott had turned an HOA meeting into a courtroom, and tonight I was the defendant in her kingdom. I stayed at the back, gripping Grandma Rose's deed so tightly it crinkled in my hand. Tracy was home on bed rest, her warning replaying in my mind. Don't let her twist the truth. Mike sat a few rows ahead, phone discreetly tilted upward, camera already rolling. Even Derek was there, standing beside his aunt like a reluctant soldier. Eyes hollow, posture rigid. Laura tapped the microphone with the precision of someone who rehearsed her own authority. Order, she barked, her voice echoing against the old tile floor. Neighbors, we have a problem. A man who believes he's above the rules that make Oak Ridge what it is. Her manicured finger pointed at me, trembling with righteous fury. Jake Rogers, a self-proclaimed heir to a property that falls under our association. A fraud hiding behind forged papers. The crowd murmured, shifting uncomfortably. I could feel their eyes. Suspicion, fear, curiosity. She had them wrapped around her finger for years, and now she was tightening her grip. I have proof, she continued dramatically, slapping a page down on the podium. Official documentation confirming this address as part of Oak Ridge jurisdiction. She let the silence stretch, the weight of her evidence thick in the air. I took a slow step forward. May I? I asked. Her smirk widened. She thought she had me cornered. By all means, she said, handing the paper over like she was granting mercy. I held it up to the light. The seals gleamed, the signatures looked legitimate. But there it was. The detail she didn't expect anyone to notice. You see this? I asked, tapping the header. Maplewood Avenue. A ripple moved through the room. Someone near the back frowned. Wait, Avenue? Isn't that across the highway? I nodded. That's right. This house, I said, raising my voice, is on Maplewood Drive. Not Avenue. 6 inches over the line. 6 inches that mean you've been bluffing. The silence that followed was electric. You could almost hear the foundation of her authority cracking beneath her feet. A few people turned to each other, whispering. Someone chuckled quietly. Mike's camera light blinked like a heartbeat in the back row. Laura's face twitched. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't have words ready. Then her smile returned. Cold, sharp, deliberate. A typo, she said finally, voice trembling just enough to betray her panic. That doesn't change anything. But it did. The crowd could feel it. Years of pent-up frustration and suspicion were unraveling right there in that room. Derek shifted behind her, his phone half hidden, guilt flickering across his face like a candle flame. I stepped back, letting the moment breathe. A typo that changes everything, I said quietly. You've been bluffing, Laura, and we all just caught you. Gasps, murmurs, nervous laughter. Her authority, once absolute, was cracking in real time. Laura's eyes darted across the crowd, searching for support, finding only doubt. Then she did something I'll never forget. She smiled. Not the polite, polished kind. The kind of smile predators wear before they strike. And in that instant, I knew the truth. The show wasn't over. It was about to set the world on fire. Every morning, another envelope, taped higher, written louder, smelling faintly of perfume and control. Laura Scott didn't use weapons. She used stationery. Each pastel-colored notice on my door was another declaration of war. Violation. Unapproved vehicle. Fine. $200 for untrimmed hedge. Infraction. Non-compliant mailbox. It was endless. The stack grew like ivy on my kitchen counter. Suffocating. Creeping. Impossible to ignore. The first week after the meeting, she doubled down. By the second, she declared herself judge, jury, and tax collector. And by the third, she was bold enough to tape one letter so high on my door that I needed a step stool to pull it down. Each one smelled faintly of her perfume. Sharp, floral. The scent of a woman who'd spent years believing power made her untouchable. Tracy watched from the couch, resting her hands on her belly, eyes narrowed. "She's obsessed," she muttered. "You're not her neighbor, Jake. You're her project." I wanted to laugh, but the truth was colder. This wasn't about landscaping or noise ordinances. It was about dominance. I could feel it in every official notice she printed on that gold-trimmed Oak Ridge letterhead. The turning point came one quiet afternoon when I was sorting through my grandmother's old filing cabinet. Among yellowed papers and faded photographs, I found a folder labeled Property, Maplewood Drive. Inside were the original deeds, stamped and notarized. As I flipped through the pages, my pulse quickened. There it was, the survey map, clear as day. The property line ended exactly 6 inches before the HOA border. 6 inches. That tiny strip of earth meant Laura had zero legal claim to this house. I sat there, stunned, the lake breeze pushing through the open window. Grandma Rose must have known. She'd always been meticulous, the kind of woman who thought 5 moves ahead of everyone else. And now, decades later, her foresight had just handed me the truth. I called Mike immediately. He showed up within minutes, phone in hand, eyes gleaming. We spread the documents across my kitchen table. "You're kidding," he muttered, tracing the boundary line with his finger. "She's ruling over land she doesn't even own." "Exactly," I said. "She built her kingdom on a lie." Mike whistled. "If the others saw this, her whole empire would collapse." I almost smiled. Then maybe it's time they did. The next morning, I stepped onto the porch to find a new envelope. Red letters, bold font, the smell of victory. Hers, not mine. Final notice, $5,000 due. Underneath, scrawled in her all-caps handwriting, "Consider this your last warning, Jake." I held the letter up for Tracy to see. She glanced at it, unimpressed. "She's unraveling," she said softly. "When people like her feel power slipping, they start clawing." She reached for my hand. "Let her destroy herself. Just stay calm." Her words made sense, but they burned in my chest. Because calm doesn't win wars. Calm doesn't stop people like Laura Scott. And I had no idea that her next move wouldn't come on paper. It would come with the law knocking at my door. The knock was heavy, official, and behind it her voice was waiting. "Arrest the trespasser," Laura Scott shrieked from the curb, her tone slicing through the evening like broken glass. When I opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch, badges glinting under the soft porch light. Beyond them, neighbors were already gathering in clusters, eyes wide, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Mr. Rogers?" the older officer asked, polite but firm. "We've had reports of trespassing and unlawful occupancy. We'll need to see your paperwork." Behind him, Laura stood poised like a queen in exile, pearls catching the flashing red and blue lights. "That's him," she shouted, waving her leather binder like a gavel. "He's been squatting in that property for weeks. Fraudulent deed, falsified documents. I want him removed immediately." My jaw clenched. "This is my home," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. I handed over the deed, Grandma Rose's deed, the same document I'd triple-checked with county records. The officer flipped through the pages, scanning carefully. "This matches what we've got on file," he said after a moment, glancing at his partner. Relief flickered across his face. But Laura wasn't done. "He's lying," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He forged those papers. I'm the president of Oak Ridge. You have to listen to me." The younger officer sighed. "Ma'am, please step back." Her eyes bulged. "Don't tell me to step back. This is my street." And then, as if the universe had waited for the worst possible timing, I heard Tracy's voice from behind me. Weak, strained. "Jake?" I turned. She was standing in the doorway, one hand clutching her belly, the other gripping the frame. Her face was pale, her breath shallow. Then she doubled over. "Jake, it's the baby." For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then chaos erupted. The officers rushed forward, shouting for an ambulance. Neighbors gasped. Someone screamed. I caught her before she hit the floor, her weight trembling in my arms. From the sidewalk came Laura's shrill voice, cutting through the panic. "She's acting again. Don't fall for it. She's faking." The words hit me like a blade. My wife was fighting for our child. And this woman, this self-appointed monarch, was still trying to keep her crown. Red and white lights flooded the street as paramedics arrived, their boots thudding up the porch steps. They worked fast, checking vitals, stabilizing Tracy, asking questions I could barely hear. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the cool lake air, a surreal reminder that this was real. One paramedic muttered under his breath, "What kind of monster says something like that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes stayed on Tracy as they wheeled her into the ambulance. She looked at me once, tired, terrified, but still strong. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "Hold on. I'll handle this." As the sirens wailed away down Maplewood Drive, one of the officers handed back my deed. His expression had softened. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "she's gone too far. File a report. People like her don't stop until someone makes them." The cruiser doors slammed, echoing down the street. The neighbors slowly drifted away, murmuring. Laura stood frozen on the curb, her face caught between fury and disbelief, watching as her empire cracked a little more. And as the ambulance lights disappeared over the hill, I made myself a promise. Not out of anger, but out of love. I would end the Queen's reign, even if it burned the castle to the ground. He looked terrified when he handed it to me. A flash drive, shaking in his palm like it might explode. Derek stood in my doorway, his face pale under the porch light, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep covering for her," he said, glancing over his shoulder as if Laura herself might materialize from the shadows. "She's stealing from everyone, Jake. Not just you." I motioned him inside, locking the door behind us. The house was dark except for the glow from my laptop on the kitchen table. Tracy was asleep upstairs, the faint hum of the baby monitor the only sound between us. Derek sat stiffly, running a hand through his hair. "She said it was for the community," he muttered. "All those dues, the special assessments, the fines, but none of it adds up." I started noticing transfers to accounts that didn't exist. Shell companies, fake consulting fees, it's all there. He pushed the drive toward me, and I could see the weight of it in his trembling fingers. "Everything's on here. The proof. Just be careful. If she finds out I gave it to you." He didn't finish the sentence. After he left, I sat there for a long time, staring at that tiny piece of plastic. I'd been expecting another confrontation, another round of harassment. Not this. Not something that could actually take her down. Finally, I plugged it in. The files loaded slowly, the blue light blinking like a heartbeat. Folders opened into spreadsheets, invoices, and scanned bank statements. Maplewood Holdings LLC. The name repeated over and over, stamped on documents that bled corruption. I scrolled deeper. Thousands of dollars in consulting fees paid to non-existent businesses. Transfers labeled landscaping improvements that went straight into Laura's personal account. Even HOA meeting expenses inflated tenfold, signed in her perfect cursive handwriting. By the time I reached the last folder, my stomach was in knots. This wasn't just petty power. This was fraud on a grand scale. Laura Scott had been bleeding the entire neighborhood dry, hiding behind bylaws and bureaucracy. I backed away from the table, the truth crashing over me. Maplewood Holdings wasn't some abstract company. It was Laura's creation, her secret funnel, her empire built from everyone else's money. The Queen's crown wasn't pearls. It was theft. The next morning, I showed everything to Mike. He leaned over the laptop, scrolling through the files, his usual smirk replaced with grim focus. "She's cooked," he muttered. "You dropped this at the right moment. She won't just lose her title. She'll be in handcuffs." He looked up, determination hardening in his eyes. "And don't worry. I'll record everything. Every word. Every reaction. She can't rewrite this one." I nodded, my heart pounding. Tomorrow, Laura had called for a public meeting. Said she was going to expose me, reveal the truth about my so-called forged deed. What she didn't know was that I'd be walking in with my own truth, one that would shatter her kingdom from the inside out. Tomorrow, she'd try to destroy me in front of everyone, and I'd bring her crimes as my evidence. She wanted a show, so I gave her one. The community center buzzed with electricity that night, the kind that comes before a storm breaks. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor, neighbors whispered in tight clusters, and Laura Scott stood at the front like a performer ready for her spotlight. This wasn't a meeting anymore. It was theater, and she was the self-crowned queen of Oak Ridge, ready to deliver her grand act of justice. Dressed in her brightest suit, pearls gleaming, she held up a sleek tablet with a grin that could curdle milk. "Tonight," she announced, her voice dripping with triumph, "we go live." The red recording light blinked to life as she angled the camera toward the crowd. "The entire community will witness me expose the fraud living among us, the so-called homeowner, Jake Rogers." The murmurs grew louder. Some looked at me with pity, others with doubt. Mike stood near the back, his own phone raised, quietly recording a second angle. Derek lingered beside the podium, eyes down, looking like a man chained to guilt. Laura slammed her binder down with a theatrical thud. This man forged his deed, refused to pay his dues, and insulted the very people who built this neighborhood. "But I have proof. Undeniable proof." She paused for dramatic effect, letting the live viewers soak in her righteousness. I took a slow step forward. "Funny you should say that," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through her performance. "Because I brought proof too." The room stilled. Laura blinked, caught off guard. Without breaking eye contact, I plugged the USB into the projector. The screen behind her flickered, and then rows of spreadsheets appeared. Numbers, names, dates, and signatures, all hers. Transfers from Maplewood Holdings, LLC. "What you're looking at," I said evenly, "are records of every dollar this woman has stolen from her own neighbors." Gasps filled the room. People stood, craning their necks to see. One man shouted, "That's my name. I paid that landscaping fee." Another yelled, "You said the pool repairs cost 25 grand. Laura spun, eyes wide, her control slipping with every breath. "Lies!" she screamed. "Fabrications! You don't understand. I deserve every cent for what I've done for you." Her voice cracked, raw with rage. "I built this place. I kept you safe. I earned it." The room exploded. Shouts, curses, betrayal, years of fear boiling over. Derek stepped forward, his voice trembling but clear. "Enough, Aunt Laura," he said, loud enough for the mic to catch. "You didn't protect anyone. You robbed them. You robbed us." She turned on him, eyes blazing. "You ungrateful little—" But she didn't finish. The double doors burst open, and uniformed sheriffs flooded the room. The timing was cinematic, too perfect to plan. One officer's voice boomed across the chaos. "Laura Scott, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of homeowners association funds." The live stream caught every second. Her pearls swinging wildly, her binder hitting the floor, her manic laughter turning into shrieks. "You can't arrest me. I am Oak Ridge," she screamed as they pulled her toward the door. Neighbors cheered. Some cried. Mike's camera caught every flash of disbelief, every face realizing the nightmare was finally ending. For years Laura had ruled through fear, and now she was leaving in handcuffs. As the door slammed behind her and the echo faded, a strange silence settled over the room. Relief mixed with something heavier. Because even as her crown hit the floor, one name kept circling in my head, louder than the applause, heavier than the victory. Maplewood Holdings. The queen had fallen, but her kingdom's shadow was still out there. Without her, Oak Ridge felt quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a battle. Smoke cleared, bodies uncounted, and no one sure who actually won. For the first time in months, there were no pastel envelopes on my door, no perfume-laced threats fluttering on the wind. The streets were calm, the lawns still perfect. But the silence carried a different kind of tension, the kind that comes when people realize their queen was a thief. In the days after Laura's arrest, Oak Ridge turned into a neighborhood of whispers. Families compared notes, trying to piece together how deep her deception ran. One man discovered he'd paid nearly $10,000 in roof assessments that never fixed a shingle. Another found 2 years' worth of community maintenance fees, with no receipts. It was all smoke and mirrors, and now the smoke was clearing. The HOA board fell apart almost overnight. Half resigned in shame, claiming they never knew. The rest tried to rewrite history, insisting Laura had manipulated them too. For years they'd signed her paperwork without question, and now every one of those signatures was evidence. Oak Ridge's mighty system, the one she ruled with binders and bylaws, crumbled in less than a week. Derek stayed. That surprised everyone. At first, people glared when he walked down the street, muttering words like traitor and accomplice. But he didn't fight back. He showed up to clean out the community office, helped sort receipts, even sat through meetings where people shouted at him just to vent. Slowly, painfully, the anger began to thaw. It didn't look like forgiveness yet, but it looked like the beginning of one. Tracy came home from the hospital the same week the sheriffs finished their report. She was pale but smiling, a blanket around her shoulders as she watched the lake. From the porch, the air was cool, the water calm, the first real calm I'd felt since the day we arrived. She reached for my hand and whispered, "You did it, Jake. You took her down." Mike's videos had gone viral by then. Clips of Laura's breakdown, her confession, Derek's confrontation. They spread faster than wildfire. News crews camped at the edge of the cul-de-sac, calling me the man who stood up to the HOA. Neighbors who once avoided me now waved as I walked by. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt tired. One night, after Tracy went to bed, I sat at my desk and opened the USB drive again. It should have been over, but something in me couldn't let it go. As I scrolled through the folders, I noticed one I hadn't opened before. Regional expansion. Inside were contracts with names I didn't recognize. Developers, consultants, executives from 2 counties over. They weren't local. They weren't small. And every one of them was tied to Maplewood Holdings. I stared at the screen as the truth sank in. Laura wasn't just greedy. She was useful. A pawn. She'd worn the crown, but someone richer, quieter, and infinitely smarter had been pulling her strings all along. And from the looks of those contracts, they weren't finished building their empire yet. At 2 a.m., I stared at contracts signed by ghosts, developers, directors, names that reeked of money and power. The glow of my laptop painted the room in cold blue light as I scrolled through the files from the USB. Each click pulling me deeper into something far bigger than one neighborhood's corruption. Maplewood Holdings LLC wasn't a single scam. It was a system. The spreadsheets weren't limited to Oak Ridge. They listed dozens of communities, each with familiar patterns. HOA fund adjustments, acquisition credits, consultant retainers. Different towns, different presidents, the same money trail. I opened one file marked Regional Expansion 2018-2024 and felt my stomach twist. Oak Ridge was just one dot on a map of a much larger operation stretching across 4 states. Each community had fallen under Maplewood's influence, quietly, methodically, through HOA takeovers, development deals, and forged documentation. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse racing. Laura hadn't been a mastermind. She'd been a cog in a perfectly built machine. The floor creaked behind me. I turned to find Derek standing in the doorway, dark circles under his eyes, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked. He shook his head, setting a mug beside me. "She used to meet with them here," he said softly. "Men in suits. Always at night. I was told not to ask questions." His hands trembled slightly as he rubbed them together. They called themselves consultants, but they weren't. They controlled her, made her untouchable. Every time someone questioned her, she'd say, "You think I'm scared? I have people behind me." I thought she was bluffing. Until now. I turned the screen toward him, scrolling through the names. These are the people she meant. Derek's jaw tightened. They won't stop. Taking her down embarrassed them. They'll want to clean up the mess. From upstairs, Tracy's voice floated down, calm, but edged with exhaustion. "Jake, you're still awake?" She appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wrapped in her robe, her expression softening when she saw the files. "You're still digging, aren't you?" I nodded, because this doesn't end with her. These contracts, they're buying neighborhoods, controlling councils. They're turning communities into money printers. She walked closer, scanning the names on the screen. "Then you need to understand something," she said quietly. "You're not fighting a neighbor anymore. You're fighting an empire." Her words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, none of us spoke. The weight of it settled between us. The realization that Laura Scott had been a small storm, and we'd just glimpsed the hurricane behind her. I started printing the files one by one, the old printer chugging and whining as page after page piled up on the desk. Bank transfers, board minutes, property maps. Everything I could find. The machine in front of me hummed, but my thoughts were louder. What if exposing this didn't end it? What if it only painted a target on my back? Still, I couldn't stop. I organized the papers into neat stacks, labeling each binder with trembling hands. That was when I heard it. The low, steady hum of an engine outside. Headlights cut briefly across the window blinds, then went dark. I moved to the curtain, heart hammering, and looked out at the lake. The water rippled under the moonlight, still beautiful but no longer serene. For the first time since I moved here, the lake didn't feel peaceful. It felt watchful. In my mailbox, 1 envelope. No return address. Just 7 words that froze my blood. "Maplewood Holdings isn't finished with you." The paper was thick, expensive. Not the kind you buy at the corner store. The words were typed, perfectly centered, the ink a dark, almost oily black. No signature, no seal. Just the message. A threat dressed as formality. I stood in the driveway for a long time, the wind rippling across the lake, the birds eerily quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels staged, like the world is holding its breath. When I brought the letter inside, Tracy was at the kitchen table, sipping tea and folding tiny baby clothes. She saw my face before I said a word. "What happened?" I handed her the paper. She read it once, then again, slower. The color drained from her cheeks. "They know who you are," she whispered. "They know where we live." I sat across from her, the weight of it pressing into my chest. "They've known all along." Laura didn't act alone. Someone gave her permission, funding, backing. And now that she's gone, they're cleaning house. Tracy reached for my hand, her grip steady. "So what do we do?" "We don't hide," I said finally. "If we vanish, they win. We go public, make noise." Later that afternoon, Mike came by, camera in hand as always. He read the letter twice, jaw tightening. "They're scared," he said. "That's why they're threatening you. You've got proof they can't bury." "I want to release everything," I told him. "Every document, every recording." Mike hesitated. "If you do that, they'll come harder. These aren't HOA bullies, Jake. These are men in suits who build cities and bury people in paperwork." Before I could respond, Derek's truck pulled up. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Pale, shaking, dark circles under his eyes. I heard about the letter, he said quietly. Jake, don't push them. My aunt was terrified of these people. She used to get calls, meetings at night. She'd cry afterward, said they'd fix problems for her if she stayed useful. She wasn't scared of the cops. She was scared of them. Tracy stood and crossed her arms. We're not running, she said firmly. We've survived worse. The three of us sat there in uneasy silence as the daylight faded. Around 9 p.m., Mike glanced out the window and froze. Jake, look. At the end of the driveway, a black SUV idled quietly, its headlights blazing straight at the house. No movement, no sound but the low hum of the engine. Grab the camera, I whispered. Mike slipped out through the back, crouched near the bushes, and began filming. Curtains twitched in nearby homes. One by one, lights flicked on up the street. The SUV didn't move, just sat there, humming, watching. After what felt like an hour, the headlights blinked once, and then the car reversed slowly and disappeared down the road. The silence it left behind was worse than the noise. Tracy exhaled shakily. Maybe it's over. But my gut told me different, because at 2 a.m., when the world was still again, I heard that same engine return. This time the headlights stayed off. The engine died outside my house, and I finally understood Grandma Rose's warning. The lake remembers everything. Her voice echoed in my head as I stood by the window, watching the black SUV sit at the end of my driveway, its outline barely visible against the mist. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Just being there was enough. A message without words. By morning, the sheriffs arrived. 2 of them. Not the same faces from before. These were detectives from the county's Financial Crimes Division. They'd heard about Laura's arrest and the connections to Maplewood Holdings. One of them, a tall man with a lined face and tired eyes, looked around my living room like he'd seen this kind of trouble too many times. You've kicked a hornet's nest, he said quietly. These aren't just corrupt board members. They're organized, funded, and they protect their own. Guard your evidence. Don't hand it to anyone you don't trust. Not even us until it's time. I nodded, the weight of his warnings settling in my chest. They already know I have it, I said. They sent a letter. They've been watching. He gave me a long look, then gestured toward the lake outside. Then keep your lights on and your doors locked. And if that car comes back, don't be a hero. After they left, the house felt smaller. The walls seemed to listen. Tracy came down the stairs, still in her robe, her hair tied back. What did they say? That we're not done, I replied. She sighed, but there was no fear in her eyes this time, only resolve. Then we don't do this alone. That evening, we gathered in the living room. Me, Tracy, Mike, and Derek. The 4 of us, bound together by circumstance and stubbornness. Mike spread his laptop and camera gear across the table. We document everything, he said. Every call, every car, every letter. If they come for you, the whole world will see it. Derek unfolded the printed contracts and maps I'd pulled from the USB. They've got properties in 4 states, he murmured. HOAs, development committees, even zoning boards. They buy influence, rewrite laws, and make people like Laura their enforcers. I stared at the pages, at the web stretching far beyond our lake. This wasn't one HOA. It was a network, a system feeding off greed and fear, wrapped in legality. Oak Ridge had just been one chapter. Tracy placed a hand on my shoulder. You said once that this house was your fresh start, she whispered. Maybe it still can be, if we finish what you started. Her words steadied me. I looked around at the people who'd stood by me when no one else would. A neighbor who refused to back down, a man trying to redeem his family's name, and the woman who reminded me that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stays. That night, I walked out to the dock alone. The lake shimmered under the full moon, silent but alive, reflecting everything it had seen. Every scream, every fight, every secret buried beneath its surface. Behind me, gravel crunched. The SUV had returned. The engine clicked off. A door creaked open. I didn't move. I just clenched my fists and stared at the water, letting the moonlight paint the ripples gold. If they think this lake will forget, I whispered, voice steady against the night, they've never met a Rogers.